and the whale, and then we'll be talking about that wee little man Lazarus. But today, Noah's Ark, it's one of the stories that we know best. In fact, non-Christians, it's the story from the Bible that they almost universally recognize, Noah and the Ark. It's the story that we share with the youngest of our kiddos. We decorate our nurseries with animals and rainbows and capture the imaginations of our little children with all of those images. The story begins in the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible. I'm going to read beginning at Genesis 6, verse 12. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. That's how the story begins. I probably don't have to read much further because we all know this story. This story that stretches across 4 chapters of the book of Genesis. But it's a story we know. Even the little ones know it. Some of us learned this story, the story of Noah and the ark, the finer points of this story from a children's song. And I'll bet some of you know it. Noah, he built him, and... there's some! Noah... Noah, he built him, and made it out of hickory, children of the Lord. Any of you know that song? I know something. We taught it to our kids, if nothing else. It's a great song. He calls all the animals. He calls them by twosies, right? The elephants and kangaroosies, children of the Lord. You know this song. And the rain came down for 40 daisies, drove those animals nearly crazy children of the Lord. And it goes on and on and on. I mean, there's umpteen verses to this song, but at the end, the animals that went on by twosies, they all come off by threesies, grizzly bears and chimpanzees, children of the Lord. And then there's this final verse. The final verse of the song says, this is the end of my story. This is the end of my story. Everything is hunky-dory, children of the Lord. And everything is hunky-dory. I mean, the rainbow stretches across the sky with God's promise to Noah that God will never, ever destroy the earth by a flood again. This is a wonderful story to teach our children. And there's wonderful themes from the story of Noah's Ark that we share with our children. First, there's the story of faithfulness. You know, we teach our children how Noah faithfully does everything that God asks him to do. When God tells Noah to build an ark, he doesn't argue, he doesn't ask questions, he just picks up his tools and goes to work. Noah is a great example of faithful obedience. But there's also this theme of stewardship. How Noah partners with God. How God chooses a human partner to take care, to save the human race, and to ensure that the animal kingdom is preserved. And so there's this great story of stewardship and how Noah is a steward that God has charged with this task. But finally, it is a story of promise and covenant. You know, God's desire to restart God's holy promise established with this obedient human partner that the world will never again be destroyed. So we teach this to our children, to teach them about covenant and God's promises that God will hold forever. Well, it's a good thing this is Communion Sunday because this is shaping up to be a pretty short sermon. We all know it. It's a simple story that all wraps up at the end. Everything is hunky-dory-dory, children of the Lord. Except, we haven't quite gotten to the end of the story yet. That song doesn't deal with the real ending of the story. We don't dare teach our children the real ending of the story because, it's not altogether appropriate for children. In fact, I would guess that there's more than a few here today that are probably wondering what in the world I'm talking about. The end of the story. The end of the story is the rainbow in the sky, right? With God's promise. Well, after the animals all came off, after they see the rainbow in the sky, there is one more little episode to this story. The rest of the story about Noah and his family after they got off of the boat. The end of the story, not those broad themes we teach our children. The end of the story is about the theme of family dysfunction, abuse of alcohol, and brokenness and curse. Shall I just read the end of the story directly from the Bible? I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 9, beginning at verse 20. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, they laid it on both of their shoulders and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away. They did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. Lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. That's the end of the story. Old Noah plants a vineyard, and by the end of the story, all that's left are sour grapes. Two things sort of strike me about the end of this story. The first is the brokenness, the sin and the shame of this incident. The second thing that strikes me is it ends in death. And isn't that really the point? After all, along with Noah and along with Noah's family and along with all of those animals, there were two other survivors of the flood. Sin and death. The very first post-flood event recorded in Scripture is the story of the children of the Lord continuing to be broken apart by sin, relationships suffering in the fallen state of the human condition. Noah getting intoxicated, perhaps trying to dull the pain of the memories of being locked up in this floating zoo for well over a year. And while Scripture isn't quite explicit about what it was exactly that happened in that tent that caused the old man's great anger, nevertheless, Noah's anger was kindled, and with it, brokenness, cut off of relationships. Part of the family is blessed, another part of the family is cursed. Children of the Lord. There are only 8 human beings on the entire planet at this point in the story. And the first recorded account of their life in the New World is about sin and brokenness and relationships that have been torn apart. Everything is not hunky-dory. Not at all. God had tried a reset of sorts, flooding the earth, destroying everything that was wicked in the world. It's plain to see here in the peaceful rainbow-hued days following the flood that humanity is still, though, beset by brokenness and shame and even death. What were the last words of the story? And he died. End of story. Except, this isn't the end of the story either. Now, why would I say that? Because this story, remember, is recorded in the first book. It's recorded in the first book called Beginnings. That's what Genesis means. It comes in the beginnings, and the story continues from that point to be written. God will try all sorts of innovative ways to bring humanity back into a full relationship with God, one that can overcome sin and death. As the story continues, there will be judges. God will try that. And then there will be kings when the people demand it, and there will be prophets who will speak on behalf of God to the people to warn them. And God will continue to write this story chapter by chapter, book by book, generation through generation, until eventually God will try something radical. Instead of revealing himself to the people through law and prophets or delivering them time and time again, God will choose to enter into the world fully human as a way of revealing and teaching God's ways to the people as he lives and dwells among them. And when they resist, God in his human form will surrender himself to be tortured and crucified and buried. And in an almost incomprehensible way, he will use that death as a sacrifice to cover all sin. And he will use his resurrection from that grave as a way to deliver the mortal blow that promises to defeat even the power of death forever and ever. You see, today we, children of the Lord, we too, we're beset by sin and death, but there is a difference because, you see, we are a people with hope. The old Apostle Paul tries so hard to teach us that we are a people of hope because we are a people of the Son. We are those who follow Jesus Christ, in whom we believe sin and death will be forever overcome in the end. In the real end of all stories. The end where human beings finally are truly reconciled with one another. Where human beings are reconciled with all of creation. Where human beings are reconciled with our Creator. And that is the end in which we hope. That's the end to which we return at this table again and again, over and over, taking the sour grapes of the brokenness of humanity and turning it into what Jesus offered, the sweet wine of forgiveness. We come to this table to be remembered into the body of Christ. And we begin by offering our prayers. As we move to our prayer time this morning, we're reminded of those who are in the hospital. Roy Friend